like in my heroes. That's what I want to read about. I want to read about realistic love stories. You know where I'm going with the story. Just tell them. I've talked about the weight loss side of this channel. Now let's talk about the other side of me, the author side. Not that I've been much of one at the moment. I've been a bit stuck on a lot of things due to the state of the world, largely. It's hard to be motivated to write puppies and love and sunshine and roses, even through terrible situations when, you know, you're looking at some atrocities all around the world and a rise of hatred and bigotry that just breaks my heart. So yeah, it's been difficult to get back into the swing of writing words, especially my angels and demons books, because, you know, when the humans around us are doing more demonic things than even my Lucy is going to do, it's hard to feel happy about writing those sorts of things. But anyway, I write under two different names. I write under my name, Michelle Irwin, and I also write under Fleur Smith, which is coincidentally also my name technically. So both are very similar sort of stories. I have a similar voice through them all, but I don't necessarily have, how would I put this, a consistent way of writing. I know some authors write first, and that's all they ever write, and that's great. But I write first, I write third. I've written a second, which I never thought I would do, and it's sitting in a folder somewhere. And I'll probably do more seconds as I come up with my idea of doing podcast fiction, because second person is a great way to tell it, because when you're saying, can you help me through the podcast, it has more immediacy. So a blend of first and second is probably going to be what I do for the podcast plays and fictions when I do those, which hopefully I'll get some inspiration to really drill down into soon, which is part of the other reason for starting this channel. I'm hoping having some people clamoring at me to get onto it already will help to keep things moving. So probably my biggest stories to date are on the Michelle Irwin side, which is the contemporary side, is Declan Reid and his family. So Declan is my race car driver set in Australia. He is a rat bag. It was just really good fun. It all started from a conversation with a friend about whether or not race car drivers are athletes. And if you read the book, you'll determine that I definitely think that they are. Like, especially in Australia, where we have the Bathurst race, which is an endurance race that lasts for hours and hours and hours as they do 1,000 Ks. It's a lot of hard work, and I don't think anyone without stamina and endurance would be able to get through that amount of work, especially when the track gets to 50, 60 degrees sometimes. So, you know, it's not an easy career. You're not just sitting in a car doing nothing. But that conversation sort of came at a time around the same time that I started listening a lot more heavily to Triple J's Hot 100s albums at my work. And one of the songs on there was Cake, The Distance. And I don't know if you've ever heard The Distance by Cake, but it quickly became Declan sitting on the starting line of Bathurst, waiting to go, worrying about his past and trying not to think about it and having the regrets coming up from that. From there, there's 4 full novels and 2 novellas that sprung just of Declan's story with his high school sweetheart, Alyssa, the one that he's trying not to remember on the starting line, as that song came to me. And from there, it spun off into Phoebe's story as well, which is a little bit more romantic, a little bit less about the racing, but which kind of goes through life. Life is bittersweet, and her story is very bittersweet. Now, is it a romance? Not really. I know some people would say definitely not. It's a romantic story, if not a romance. And people ask, is it happily ever after? I say yes. Some people say no. It's up to people to decide. I'm not going to tell someone how to read my book. I'm not going to tell them how they should feel at the end of it. My job as an author is to make them feel, plain and simple. If you feel, if you hate the characters, if you love them, if you hate the ending, if you love it, then I've done my job. And that's what I aim for. I aim for entertainment. I'm not the next Shakespeare or Jane Austen or Ernest Hemingway or something like that. I'm not aspiring to be some literary god. I just want to entertain. I just want to tell the stories of the characters that are in my head and entertain. And if I do that, then I've done my job. And I've always had a noisy head. And that probably sounds weird if you don't know what I'm talking about. But I've always had, not necessarily voices talking to me, but I've had a busy imagination that wasn't necessarily tied to the real world in any way. So I had, my brother and I used to play pretending that we were going on the faraway tree, except instead of a tree, it was a clothesline. We'd spin around it and end up in some new land, and within 2 seconds, we had to tell everything about that land. And I honestly believe that was sort of the start of my journey towards being an author. Currently, all of my books are self-published, which I know some people regard as not really being an author, which is a load of crap if you ask me. You still had to write the book, edit the book, get the book ready. In some ways, it's harder than having a publisher, because I had a publisher at the beginning and they did all the formatting and everything like that. When you're self-published, you have to learn how to do all of that yourself. And I don't necessarily think one is better than the other, but they are different experiences. And I do believe that self-published authors, whether they go through the full editing thing or not, they're still authors. They've still written a book, which is a hell of a lot more than what a lot of other people do in their life. So my other side of me is Fleur Smith, and Fleur Smith writes paranormal. I did originally publish them under Michelle Irwin, but I had a few people sort of complaining that they were getting paranormal stuff and they weren't interested in paranormal. I had people getting contemporary stuff that weren't interested in contemporary, so I split the two pen names. I may eventually get another, depending on what I end up writing. If I write something that's completely different to both, I might end up with a new pen name. The pen names aren't to hide who I am. I will always be proud of the books that I've written, and I'll always want my name on them because I wrote the damn things. But yeah, it's about distinguishing. Paranormal side is Romeo and Juliet meets Supernatural is probably my biggest story, which is the Daughter of Fire and Son of Rain series that run in parallel. I wrote those after watching a few too many episodes of Supernatural and having some issues. I was already writing the story, but I was having some issues with who the lead male was going to be. I knew the female, I knew what she was going to be, I knew how that was going to work, and I originally thought that I would team a dragon up with her, but I just couldn't get the story right. And then I was binging Supernatural and started to think, well, what if one of the brothers fell in love with a creature? And I know that's happened a lot of times, but I started to think, well, what if he didn't just fall in love? What if he fell in love to the point where he was willing to turn on his own brother for it? And that's sort of where the spark of inspiration for Clay came from. He is basically following dogma until he meets someone who challenges that dogma. And once he does, it's hard for him to justify being mindlessly a killer. And that's why I've got the two different series for that, because Daughter of Fire follows Evie in a first person, and her story is heartbreaking, but uplifting at the same time. There's a lot of hope in it. It has features of not giving up despite everything, and being hated for what you are, something that you've got no control over. The way she was born, that alone gave a death warrant on her. In a lot of ways, you could draw comparisons between Evie and, say, the LGBTQ plus community, or the Muslim community, or any number of persecuted communities that are persecuted just for who they are, something they can't control. So Evie's story follows her quest for survival. And yes, that means meeting Clay, and her life intertwines with his a lot. There's also places where he doesn't have any part in her life, and those places are where her story comes into its own in a lot of ways. On Clay's side of things, he follows instructions and the institution that he's always had faith in. And he's had faith in it because he's never had a reason to have his faith shaken. And that, I believe, is a lot like a lot of churches. I'm not calling out any religion in particular. Some are a lot worse than others. But there are those who would persecute people just because of who they were born as, because of some book or some higher authority that they say gives it to them, grants them that ability. And that's wrong. And I've always believed that that's wrong. Ever since I was a child, I've questioned why someone can hate the very being of another person just because of who they love, or the color of their skin, or any of those things that are out of their control. And so Clay, in that way, represents a church member, or a cult member, or, you know, one of 100 people you would have met on the street who believes in certain things for no real valid reason other than that's what their parents taught them, or that's what they've come to learn based on their own limited exposure to the other type of people. And Clay's very much like that. He has had exposure to the world of other creatures for a long time, and he basically has killed them all because they're all evil. There's no shades of grey between the black and white of life and death for him. If you're an other, if you're not human, you must therefore be evil. And he believes that because that's what he's been told to believe. That's what he's been trained to believe. And it's not until he meets someone who is other, who challenges that belief just by being her. You know, it's hard for him not to fall in love with Evie. And by being her, she challenges that belief that all others are wrong and that they're evil. And to me, that was such an important story to tell because, like I said, there are so many out there that buy into lies about other people without ever knowing those other people, who are racially prejudiced without understanding why, just because of the way they were raised, or who are bigoted against LGBTQ+, because of the way that they were raised. No one comes to these hateful things without instruction. No one comes to these hateful things without some sort of institution behind them, forming their beliefs. And that's what this story is about fundamentally, is challenging those beliefs, deciding what your beliefs are. Some people will still challenge those beliefs, meet the others, and decide that they still deserve death. And those people are a lost cause. You're never going to bring them around to your side. But others will meet someone who challenges those expectations they have. They'll meet someone who doesn't follow the stereotypes. And that's really, really important. I think that's where allyship is important. Clay becomes an ally for Evie, not because he's another himself, but because he believes that there's an injustice being done by the belief the organisation has. And I think it's a kind of special story. And it was my debut, and I've always been proud of it, and I always will be. There's things wrong with it. I'd probably write it differently if I was to go back and redo it now, but that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it is what it is. It was a time capsule for the time. With everything going on in the world at the moment, honestly, I think if I was to write it again now, Evie would probably end up dead and Clay would be claiming the scalp, because there's so much evil and sometimes it seems that they're winning. But ultimately, that's when you need to dig down and work harder and fight harder. And that's what I need to do. And that's probably going to be the focus of my next few stories. I'm probably going to set aside some of the ones that I was working on. So I was doing a follow-up to Phoebe's stories. I was doing Angels and Demons and a few different bits and pieces. And I think for me, I need to set those aside and start working on something with a degree of hope, a degree of justice, that although bad will always exist, sometimes in tiny ways, good can prevail. And I honestly believe that good is not being a bigot. If you don't like someone's lifestyle, don't live it. Simple. If you don't like someone because of the colour of their skin, how hateful is that? They can't control what colour they were born. They can't control what area they were born in. Can't control what country they were born in. But for the luck of God, all of us could be in the wrong country and having to flee for our lives. And this video is a lot more political than I intended it to be, but unfortunately, it's difficult to split up the political side of me and the writing side of me, because writing is the way that I process politics. Writing is the way that I add my voice to the world in a way that makes sense to me, without having to form ideas and get on picket lines. And it's just a way that I can add just a little bit of goodness into the world where I can. And that's what I want to try and do. So yeah, if you haven't read my books already and you're interested in checking them out, I'll leave links to my Amazon pages down in the description. At the moment, they're all on Kindle Unlimited, so you can, grab them and read them if you've got that subscription. But if you're not interested, that's fine. My books aren't for everyone. And even if you're interested in the premise, that doesn't mean the story is going to be for you or the writing is going to be for you. There's 100 reasons why you might hate it. There's 100 reasons why you might love it. I just wanted to make a video at the start of this journey where I could say, this is me, this is a part of me, this is what I've done, and let people find it if they want to. But if not, skip this video, move on to the next one. There'll still be the weight loss journey videos coming. I don't know if I'll do a lot of craft aspect of writing side of things, because although I am confident in my craft, I don't necessarily think that there is one right way of doing anything. And I think sometimes craft videos can veer into, you must do this or you're wrong. Whereas I don't think there is a wrong way to write. I think anything works so long as it makes a connection with the audience. And that's what is important. And sometimes the connection with the audience isn't about finding something that will make everyone happy. It's about finding the thing that will make the audience that you want happy. And honestly, I want an audience who is accepting. I want an audience who will understand Evie's plight and who will understand Declan's redemption. And I want someone to read my books who understands that life is hard, but sometimes we can triumph. And I want someone to read my books who understands that up here is a bit of a mess and it's very noisy, and my characters reflect that. They have noisy heads because I have a noisy head. My characters are me in ways that are crazy and stupid, but they're also not me in ways that I couldn't imagine having half of the spirit that they have, half the evil that some of them have. I couldn't imagine living my life the way that some of them do, or with the people that they choose. But again, that's their choices, and they're part of me who can understand those parts, who empathizes with people in those positions. And empathy is a big part of why I write. So yeah, that's that. I don't know what more to say about the writing part of me, to be honest. It is what it is, and I'm proud of it. I'm terrified by it. I hate self-promoting. I can talk about my characters until the cows come home. I can talk about the stories until the cows come home. I'll probably give away too many spoilers and all of that sort of problem, but I do love them, and that's why I want to share them. I don't necessarily want to sell 1 million copies and have 1 million people read my book. I'd love as many people as possible read my book, but it's about finding that connection. I'd rather people read it who can connect with it and who can understand who can understand the reasoning behind the story, because that's the most important thing for me. So yeah, until next time, bye.